13 Sentinels Aegis Rim originally released in 2019, so to say the least, I'm a bit late to the party when it came to finally playing this game. But I just want to say I easily spent almost 30 hours in this game, and I was pleasantly surprised with the experience it offers. The way the game breaks up the story and the combat system, it was almost completely different than any other game I've played so far this year. But that's what made it so enjoyable. Getting to know the characters in this game and experience each story and watch how they intertwine made it a nice experience. Before I get started, I also just want to give a little disclaimer. I'm going to be trying my best not to dive too deep into the main story or talk a lot about any spoilers about the characters or the enemies within this game, but just be aware that something may slip out, but I will do my best. So the story for this game begins super vaguely. You'll get an introduction to each character in the beginning of the game with a short story or interaction with them, which will then lead to a fight, which is essentially tutorial missions that you'll have to go through. Once you get past the tutorial, the game is broken into 3 different categories, which is destruction or the combat phase, remembrance, which is mostly the story, and analysis, which is where you kind of unlock different things. I didn't really spend too much time with the analysis, so I really won't be focusing on it too much within this review. I'm going to be mainly focusing on the remembrance phase right now, and we'll be talking about the main story and how it's broken down and tied together. I'm going to be trying to avoid any major spoilers like I said before within the game, because I definitely think that this is a game that you should experience for yourself if you haven't been able to yet. So anyways, after completing the tutorial, you'll have access to any of the 11 main protagonists' stories within this. However, there are 2 more characters that you will have to unlock as you progress throughout the story. Now, I'm not going to be diving too deep into any individual character's story, because honestly, that would take me way too long. So what I do want to do is talk about what I liked about the stories, and honestly, there's a lot. For instance, one of the biggest things I enjoyed about the stories is how each of the characters' stories are intertwined in some way with another character's story. So you can basically see certain events play out in multiple different ways and already know what happened or get new details that you didn't know before. I also love how you can choose to play a character and it doesn't force you to play as different characters every single run. So if you want to continue playing a certain story, you can. The game doesn't force you to stop. Every time you play as a character, you'll gain a little bit of knowledge that contributes to the overall plot of the story. Speaking of the plot, this game really does know how to throw you for a loop, but somehow manage to reel you back in and help you understand everything that's going on. Trust me, there's a ton going on, especially with all the time travel. Another thing I loved and is absolutely fantastic is how all the characters' relationships develop and change between each other and how they continue to build on themselves as characters. Honestly, I could go on and on about how fantastic the story was, how great the plot was, and how I had no clue about the massive twist at the end was going to occur. But my overall thoughts on the story is, yeah, it's great. But not only that, it somehow makes you want to keep playing. I'm not someone who normally goes for games that heavily focus on stories, but in 13 Sentinels' case, how they prioritize the story and develop the characters, this game honestly does it right. Let's talk about the world building. For the setting of the world, it takes place in a few different locations. Primarily taking place in Japan, you will jump into different time periods within Japan, going from 1945 to 1985 and all the way up to 2188. The world and the setting is simple. It takes on a simple background of Japan and different scenes depending on what area you're in. It does get slightly repetitive, but honestly, this is not a game you're playing to see a beautiful open world. The scenes that get played go along with what's going on in the story at that time. For instance, this is going to be a spoiler, but there is a portion where you end up discovering a UFO, and so the scene in the back is a UFO, but you will be seeing that a lot throughout the game, and it's the exact same scene that gets reused. They really did do a good job also in some other areas of making the game feel very post-apocalyptic, like the world had actually been destroyed. When you get to the combat portion of the game, you will be seeing an over-the-head tactical view that you will use to manage your units in a fight. This portion of the world is also fairly basic and not much going on with it, since it's just 6 different characters within an arena facing off against enemy units. Overall though, for how simple both of these seem, it really does add something to this game that makes it way more enjoyable of an experience. I personally didn't think I was going to enjoy the combat, but since you can go back and forth between doing the combat and also doing the story, it really gives a nice little break between the two of them, which allows for a better experience, since you aren't being forced to do one thing over the other in my personal opinion. Throughout the game, you will be introduced to 13 different characters, as I said before. Each one of these characters is extremely unique. One of the biggest things I loved is how crazy some of the stories can be. I honestly thought a few of them were boring until I got further into the game and realized how these character stories were connected, or how they ended up revealing some of the different twists in each one of them, or how each of these characters have a super enjoyable backstory and how that gets revealed during certain portions of their story to help expand on the bigger story at hand. Some of the stories were a bit longer than the others, and in some cases that wasn't always better, but I will say they did a really good job to pull you back into it, especially if you feel like it was being drawn out. I really don't think there was a character I didn't like within this game. Each one of them had a pretty cool story. The enemies you will face off against are called the kaiju. They are originally described as giant machines that are sent from space that are trying to destroy the Earth. You'll later find out that these kaiju are able to travel through space and time, and that they're trying to destroy all of the parallel worlds within this game. And like I said before, I don't want to ruin too much of the story by continuing to talk about them and the origins of where they're from or how they came to be, but what I will say is there is a few different variants of the kaiju that can range from ground units, air units, and sentinels that were originally captured in a different sector of the game. There is a bit of variety, which makes it a way better and more enjoyable strategy game than I originally thought it was going to be, since I did have to actually plan out what units to use each fight based on the enemy. I had to make sure I had units who could use EMPs if I didn't have anyone who could fight off the flying units. So it does a really great job at making you have to strategize and really think about what your next move is going to be. When I discuss the combat for this game, game, I'm mostly going to be talking about the destruction phase of the game. You'll be offered to either play the game in normal difficulty or hard mode. There is also a casual mode if you basically want to skip through the combat and just enjoy the story itself. I honestly had a ton of fun with the combat in this game. You're able to pick commands for each unit or character you have. While you are selecting either a skill or to move your character or repair or defend them, the game will pause. So you essentially get a bit of time to come up with a strategy and see what's the best way to deal with each situation at hand. Every character obviously has their HP and a certain amount of action points. The game does call it something different, but for the simplicity reasons, I'm going to continue to call them action points. You'll perform moves which can either be attack, defense, or support skills, which will cost you a certain amount of points. At some point you will run out depending on the skills that you're performing, and you'll have to defend to regain some points. Enemies will constantly be firing off attacks. However, you are able to deflect rockets and shots fired at your units by using your own skills. Plus, if enemies are going to attack you, you'll have an indicator on screen, so you'll be able to see where the attack is going to be, so you are able to dodge. Another key feature of the combat system is how they implemented basically a fatigue system. No unit is able to battle more than twice in a row due to stress on the pilot that the Sentinel puts on the brain. But I will say you are able to just rest and basically have them recover if you wanted to. And at some point I did end up just resting and getting my best units back on the field. My overall thoughts on the combat system is it's extremely simple, but it has enough things in it to make it seem somewhat complex. You'll end up having a ton of things going on at the same time on screen, so you'll need to really pay attention to each unit and keep an eye on them, so if you need to move them out of harm's way, especially when you don't realize that they're at low HP. But speaking of that, the game is extremely generous and it gives you a warning whenever someone's HP is low. And like I said, I really enjoyed it, but at some point it did seem to get kind of easy depending on the skills that you decided to invest into. Jumping off the combat system into the skills and leveling, I'm not going to be spending too much time with this, since I don't really want to dive crazy deep into the system, but essentially you can level up each character and their sentinels. Each one will have access to different skills or moves based off the type of sentinel they are. For example, the first generation units are primarily melee. The second generation are what they call all-rounders and can help on defense and offense and so on and so forth. For me, I did primarily focus on using first and second generation pilots every single wave once I got to a certain point, since I noticed that first generation was able to dish out the most single target damage, which helps a ton when they are heavily armored enemies that need to be dealt with quickly. Past that though, you are able to upgrade your character's stats individually, and you can also upgrade different skills which allow them to do more hits or more damage. Each character does also have different skills that they will gain every 5 levels, which provide a nice added bonus. The retail price of this game is $59.99, and honestly I do believe this game is completely worth the price. With about a 28-hour main story that's beautifully crafted and well developed throughout the entirety of the game, super simple and fun combat system that allows you to go back and replay missions to unlock different skills on characters if you really want to experience everything, a great voice acting cast along with an amazing audio and soundtracks within this game, it'll definitely have you wanting to play it again. Plus, the game is older, so I'm definitely sure you can find it at a discounted price. Well, there you have it. That's my review of 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. Thanks for watching if you made it this far. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.